Hey everybody, it's Dr. Jensen, and welcome to Module 7, New Media in the 21st Century. So we're going to go through some topics from the Surrett text just to get started, and this is part 1. So first, when we look at the media and criminal justice policy, we have talked about how media and criminal justice have had an influence on each other, and we've talked about lots of different concepts that have showed us that. But we're really moving into what's next and really looking at an ever multiplying outlet of new media technologies, persuasive multimedia constructs, and constant looping, constant recycling of messaging on criminal justice ideas. So first, to jump into this, we will talk about what we have learned so far. And then secondly, we will talk about some cause and feedback models introduced to us by Surrett so that we can kind of pull all this together. So first, we have a complex crime and justice portrait. So again, the merging of news and entertainment media, which Surrett calls infotainment, the constant looping of content, faster dissemination, and the breadth of distribution has impacted our social construction of crime and justice reality. So again, when we talk about new media, some of the things we're gaining here are, again, faster speed, more breadth, and just quicker turnaround. And it's so funny when we talk about kind of instant and immediate messaging at our fingertips, when we talk about our technology and our access to social media, to the web, to 24-hour crime news loops, and so forth. So some of the messages that come out of all this traffic is that criminals are predatory and dishonest. Again, holding that drama that it's not anything new from kind of the old media, but it's a continued message in new media. Also, that the criminal justice system is ineffective and counterproductive in response, which is, again, a really unfair criticism of the criminal justice system. And inside there, you can talk about conformity to backwards law. You can talk about having some of the least common crimes not really making headlines. Because remember, the most common crime out there is theft or unlawful taking. And it just doesn't have the same kind of attention capture like violent crime does. So oftentimes, traditional criminal justice system personnel and standard practices suffer, and they don't really get the attention they deserve. It's just seen as kind of ineffective and not working, so it kind of gets ignored. And finally, crime is an individual choice rather than a social, economic, or structural phenomenon. So research has already showed us that crime is very, very complex and goes well beyond individual choices. So we have to really think about these messages and their accuracy when we study media and crime. Again, to continue on how complex this crime and justice portrait is, we can talk about the two icons of crime fighter and the war on crime, which suggests that crime must be fought rather than solved or prevented. Again, it kind of focuses more on a punitive response rather than anything that we can be proactive about. Furthermore, media-suggested responses to crime also include harsher punishments, crime control practices where we kind of limit the offenders, hiring more law enforcement, and encouraging people to navigate society through a fear of crime. Finally, research demonstrates that media molds crime rather than triggers it. And we certainly have copycat effects that work mostly on property crimes than on violent crimes, and only on individuals who are predisposed to misconstruing fantasy from reality. We'll talk more about that when we go into the models. Also, research has told us that anti-crime media efforts have been useful in influencing attitudes and distributing information, but not ultimately on changing criminal behavior. So again, we've talked about this when we studied the DARE program, McGruff the Crime Dog, and certainly other outlets. But again, you need to recognize that overall, no program has empirically demonstrated a significant long-term and displacement-free effect on crime. So ultimately, anti-crime media and media technology are really unable to deter completely criminal behavior as long as they are limited in the ways that they currently are. But they can also tend to criminalize previously law-abiding individuals, so they can kind of backfire as well. But media programs shouldn't be tossed aside as anti-crime efforts. They can actually have significant immediate effects, and you can use them in lots of different ways. Finally, perceptions of crime really are intertwined with perceptions on social conditions. So you may come at your views on crime from looking at crime as a social evil, thinking about people being um, innately evil, dishonest. You can look at it from effects of poverty. You can look at it through a social justice lens. You can look at it from an economic lens or a biological lens as far as how people are hardwired. And through social conditions as to what creations are influencing crime based on what people do not have or are actively seeking. Let's get into the models. So the first model that Surratt talks about is the primary cause model. And the two ways to think about this model are that they are direct and correlated. So essentially we are saying that unwanted behaviors are coming out of these media effects directly, that they are significant and it's a linear relationship. And essentially media, independent of any other factor, can directly cause undesirable social behaviors such as crime. So let's look at these examples in figure 11.1 in your text. So first we look at violent pornography, again, media imagery of individuals, and them as a direct cause of sexual crimes. Most people that view pornography or violent pornography are not committing sexual crimes, so there is very little evidence for this model. Secondly, violent media content can cause aggression. Again, not a lot of support for this, so just consuming violent media, movies or films or television, whatnot, that show people fighting and actively destroying one another doesn't necessarily cause people to be aggressive. And then finally, crime-related media content, just consuming crime shows or documentaries or whatnot, can basically directly cause a mean worldview. People who are very cynical and caustic, who don't have trust, who think life is competitive and we're all out to get each other, and essentially support punitive policies that actively punish individuals for not acting properly. So again, there is not a lot of research and support for these ideas. If there was, then we would have to have strong interventions in the creation, the content, and the distribution of media to try to limit these undesirable behaviors. But it's not that simple now, is it? Let's look at the negligible cause model from Surratt. The two ways to think of this model is that they are associative and concurrent. So essentially, we see this somewhat supported in research. There is a statistical association between media and some negative behaviors, but this connection that they have is really not due to a causal relationship, but they kind of occur together, behaving in ways similar to the behavior, and they're kind of interesting in how they occur together. So again, we'll go through the examples. Hypermasculine males cause exposure to sexually violent media content, that they're the audience that sexually violent media content distributors are looking for. And in turn, they are also committing sexual crimes. But again, these things can be associated together. Sexual crimes are often committed by hypermasculine males who have also consumed sexually violent media, but they are not exclusive or direct from that. So again, people that commit sexual crimes do not necessarily consume sexually violent media content or find themselves as hypermasculine males. So there are exceptions to these rules. They tend to occur together, but they are not exclusive and they are not absolute in their relationships. Secondly, predisposed persons, and we're talking about people with maybe certain personality traits or mania or things like that. They may have lack of self-control. They may be very impulsive. They may have low empathy or be antisocial or whatnot. They cause exposure to violent media content. They indulge in these kinds of images, and in turn, aggressive behavior is created. So again, these can occur together. They do associate with each other, but they are not absolute. You can definitely have aggressive behavior without having a predisposed person. We all have moments where we lose it, where we lack self-control, but that doesn't mean that's how our entire life operates. We can have moments where we are in moments of passion or a lapse in judgment, or we become negligent based on situational factors. And certainly consuming violent media doesn't mean that we are predisposed, that we just happen to like violent media. So again, these don't occur in direct causal formats. And then finally, persons holding mean world attitudes are driving the exposure to crime-related media content. This one is almost silly to think about. Again, crime-related media content is fascinating to people. Crime shows are some of the highest rated shows on television, streaming media, in the movie theater, whatnot. It's part of entertainment. In some ways, it's kind of a little disturbing that it is so fascinating and has such a strong fan base, but it doesn't directly come from people that hold mean world attitudes. It just means that's what they find interesting and fascinating. You wouldn't be in a class like this if you didn't maybe also see some fascination with crime portrayed through media, whether it was real or not. And again, having support for punitive policies. This is associative, but not causal. So again, just realize these can occur together, but they're not always that way. Essentially, if the negligible cause model is correct, and we really see the associations between behaviors and media exposures, then essentially we would have to look at policies that are targeted at the media, having really no effect on social behavior, and having some evidence for saying we can just safely ignore media because we don't have direct causes and effects, and so why bother to regulate the media? It doesn't really do what we want it to do. But overall, neither of these models can really accurately describe true media and social behavior relationships. And this is where Surratt is particularly good in his explanation of how these relationships are actually cyclical and bidirectional. So in figure 11.2, you come across a model that looks like this. This is the reciprocal feedback model. And essentially, the media play a role in the generation of people who are predisposed to crime. But there's a feedback loop or an effect that goes back and forth. So for example, when you have made-for-TV movie industries, real-world crimes in movies, sometimes resulting in the creation of criminogenic media. And again, when we use the word criminogenic, we're talking about crime generating. If you have live models and community and home environments that are more tolerant of crime, it will result in criminally predisposed people. Again, when you add new media to this model, it kind of broadens the access to criminogenic media. And therefore, the direct effects of media content on social behavior may not be totally large, but they get recycled and accumulated through these relationships. So again, predisposed individuals can seek out violent crime-related or sexually violent media content, and they can have an effect on having a violent, sexually aggressive, or mean world personality. We do see both of those effects coming out of predisposed individuals. Certainly seeking out crime-related or sexually violent media content can occur where you're pushed toward a violent, sexually aggressive, or mean world personality. But again, these two kind of can go into each other as far as seeking it and displaying it. And then certainly violent acts or tolerance of violence can make you want to seek out that content, but it also can produce the personality. So again, these kind of originate in these loops and circles where we just have to realize that they kind of affect each other and they go round and round and round. So they're not linear and they are associative, but they're not direct correlates. So essentially, that's why it's so complicated to come up with the proper set of media regulations, guidelines when people are trying to find media content, either for information or entertainment, and why we still have expression and creativity, because it just doesn't produce these ultimate outcomes of people and behavior that we can count on. So again, this is found in the Surrett text, and I thought it was worth going into to really help you think through what Surrett is saying about how these models work. So this concludes part 1, and we'll see you in the next lecture.